Good morning. Good to have everyone that might be connected with us. It is time for us to begin our Bible study this morning. We'll be in Leviticus chapter 20. Before we begin that, let's go to God in prayer. Our God and Father in heaven, we are thankful for the days that we have, for this day, Lord, when we can come, we can turn to your word and search from it those things that you have revealed. We look forward to the period of worship that we will be able to offer you on this day also. Father, we ask your blessings to continue upon us and upon this nation and upon those that may be affected with the virus, that if it be your will through that providential care, they may be returned to their health. Father, we ask blessings as the times of turmoil continue, as this election season, that you will give us blessings on it, and the things that are done might be done to the greater good of your will and for the good of all men throughout the world. We ask all these things through your Son's name. Amen. Leviticus chapter 20. Leviticus chapter 20 is going to speak on punishments for sin, really looking at what happens when you violate the law. Much of this has already been stated, but now God's going to get a little more clarification on it and talk about the punishments that come from it. Looking at verses 1 through 8, you're going to see the prohibitions and pagan worship. We begin there. Let's look at verses 1 through 5 to start with. Verses 1 through 5. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Again thou shalt say to the children of Israel, Whosoever he be of the children of Israel, or of the strangers that sojourn in Israel, that giveth any of his seed unto Molech, he shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. And I will set my face against that man, and will cut him off from among his people, because he hath given of his seed unto Molech, to defile my sanctuary, and to profane my holy name. And if the people of the land do in any ways hide their eyes from the man, when he giveth of his seed unto Molech, and kill him not, then I will set my face against that man, and against his family, and will cut him off, and all that go a whoring after him to commit whoredom with Molech from among their people. As we look at verses 1 through 5, Leviticus 18:21 has already prohibited the sacrifice of children to Molech. But the punishment and the community's accountability, you notice quite often today we hear people say, in a case that could be put against this, my body, my choice. You notice that in the Old Testament, it may have been a child's body involved, but the community had a responsibility also. And so we see this. And it applied not just to the children of Israel, but to any strangers that resided in Israel. They were to be put to death if they offered their young to Molech. We talked about this before and what that could mean, but to give a description of what would happen with this, here is an ancient Canaanite god. The way they would worship this god is they built a tall, huge, but hollow statue out of metal. That statue had his hands set forth. And to literally offer a child to Molech, they would build a huge fire inside that statue and then lay that child in those hands after it's gotten good and hot. And so you can get the picture. Going on around this while they were doing it would be loud banging on the drums and screaming and all of those things, really an attempt to cover up the pain that's going to be felt by that sacrifice. And so here is God saying, if you turn to this, the result for you is a death penalty. And if we think about that, that goes back to some of the things that we've already looked at. that goes back to Genesis, where it's defined that life is in the blood and that the taking a life requires a life. This is what God's putting forth, that same thing. It has not really changed when we look into the New Testament. Now, there's not as we would see it, a physical death penalty put forth. But how many people in this world are going to face exactly what's described here one day when they're going to have to stand before God and take account for what they have done? The taking of a life will require a life. That's what God puts forth. This idea that the children should just be given to Molech because he was some sort of powerful image. And that does not necessarily mean today, if we take this for our learning, as we're told by the New Testament, that we actually have to kill the children. Though there is a case in this world today where children are killed willfully by their mother. Now think about that, and I do not know why anyone has not brought it into court this way. But it is legal in some states for a woman to take the life of a child up till the moment of birth. But in the same states, if you're in a car accident and a drunk driver has hit you and it causes the death of the child, the mother lives, that man can be charged with murder. How can he be charged with murder and a woman do it and not be charged with murder? Well, it goes to the same thing we're seeing that God defined here. She is charged. She will be held accountable, just as it says they would here. If we are not, as God's people, standing against those kind of things, what will happen to us? We as a community will be held accountable one day for that. And so we see that picture put forth. Are we considering what happens and looking back? And again, the Old Testament's not our law today, but life for life, and we see that description that God gives. How many people and how many of us, because we don't stand against it directly, will be held accountable for it one day? Verses 6 through 8, adding to that, as he goes on further, you have the idea of how you treat your children. Now in 6 through 8, we're going to see spiritual adultery, where it says, "And the soul that turneth after such as have familiar spirits and after wizards, to go a-whoring after them, I will even set my face against that soul and will cut him off from among his people." So we see the first thing, God's already said you don't go after those with familiar spirits. Even though we have an account of it, we see what happened when Saul did it. How many people today go after something equivalent to this by going to the fortune teller, having your palm read? Now, if you do it for anything other than entertainment and laughing at it value, reading your horoscope in the paper, that is all falling under this same sort of idea. And we know the New Testament speaks against it just as well as the Old did. But you see the idea, God's going to cut them off. Why? They're trusting in something other than God. In both cases so far, when you offered children to Molech, your idea was, I'm going to get some blessing or something out of this. What do people do with abortion today? They're hoping to get something out of this. I'm not held accountable for what I did. I hear that when women say that, my body, my choice. You're absolutely right. Before you entered into an act that could create a child, you ought to have thought of that. My body, my choice. Make the choice earlier. That's the key. God's giving the same thing. They thought they could get something special from Molech or some benefit from it. We see the same thing today. When they go to the medium or the familiar spirit or someone to read their fortune, they thought they could get some benefit from it. In both cases, they're failing to trust in God. Look now, verses 7 through 8, God's trying to make it very clear to them. Sanctify yourself. If you're going to be a follower of God, you've got to sanctify yourself. You have to be holy. Why does God say that? For I am the Lord your God. He's holy. We need to be holy. Set apart, different from what everyone else is doing. Verse 8, and ye shall keep my statutes and do them. I am the Lord which sanctify. We see the whole picture. God people should be different than those around about them, unless everyone is without fail a follower of God. And unfortunately, we know from the Bible, while that would be God's intention and desire, man's free will is going to have it where some men will not follow God no matter what we do. But what are we doing with what we have? Notice verse 9 now, and then we'll look at 10 through 21, but verse 9. For everyone that curses his father or his mother shall be surely put to death. He hath cursed his father or his mother, his blood shall be upon him. Think about how we treat parents in this case, is what it's bringing forth. There is a case where in time past, God said, if you mistreat your parents, it's worthy of death. We may not have that physical law any longer where stoning will happen for mistreating parents, but what will one day happen based on the treatment of our parents? And no matter what, we need to remember that and watch for how we treat the parents. We get to verses 10 through 21. I'm going to read the whole section and then just come back through it with bullet points because we've covered much of this already. God, again, restating some of the laws and giving specific punishments for them. Beginning at verse 21, and the man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even he that committeth adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. And the man that lieth with his father's wife hath uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. And if a man lie with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall surely be put to death. They have wrought confusion, their blood shall be upon them. If a man also lie with mankind as he lieth with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. And if a man take a wife and her mother, it is wickedness. They shall be burnt with fire, both he and they, that there be no wickedness among you. And if a man lie with a beast, he shall surely be put to death, and ye shall slay the beast. And if a woman approach unto any beast and lie down thereto, thou shalt kill the woman and the beast. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. And if a man shall take his sister, his father's daughter, or his mother's daughter, and see her nakedness, and she see his nakedness, it is a wicked thing, and they shall be cut off in the sight of their people. He hath uncovered his sister's nakedness, he shall bear his iniquity. And if a man shall lie with a woman having her sickness, and shall uncover her nakedness, he hath discovered her fountain, and she hath uncovered the fountain of her blood, and both of them shall be cut off from among their people. And thou shalt not uncover the nakedness of thy mother's sister, nor thy father's sister, for he uncovereth his near kin, they shall bear their iniquity. And if a man shall lie with his uncle's wife, and he hath uncovered his uncle's nakedness, they shall bear their sin, they shall die childless. And if a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. He hath uncovered his brother's nakedness, they shall be childless. We go back through the list for a moment. God simply putting it out there again. Adultery is punished by death, usually by stoning, as we see the account written over in John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11. But thinking about that, when you think about that account in the New Testament with this verse here for a moment, when that woman who was caught in the very act of adultery, the accusers say, was brought before Jesus, he wouldn't pronounce judgment. Why? Well, think about this. The man that committeth adultery with another man's wife, even he that committeth adultery with his neighbor's wife, the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. There is only one way to have been caught in the very act. So where was the man? That's how Jesus answered their charge. They wanted to apply by fiat to the woman, but ignore the man in this case, and that cannot be done. Another case that's covered here in these verses, incest. Either a man taking his father's wife or a father taking his daughter-in-law, both cases punished by death, both the man and the woman in these cases. Homosexuality is punished by death under the Old Testament law. Sexual relations with both mother and daughter punished by death by fire. Bestiality, either by a man or a woman, is punished by death. Sibling cohabitation is punished by being cut off from the people and bearing the iniquity. Evidently, it's not a capital offense, but it's one that would require a sin offering to be taken care of. Sexual relations during that menstruation, during the menstrual cycle, makes both of them unclean. We've already seen that. Cohabitation, in this case, with blood-related aunts, punished per the sibling cohabitation above. Sexual relations with an aunt by marriage, punished by childlessness, apparently divinely administered punishment, not a capital offense, but in any case, one that would bring shame upon a family. And then sexual relations with a sister by marriage, punished as the relations with the aunt or with the other, as it's listed above. And so we see this idea, God saying there are limits to what a man and a woman can do. And if you notice this, God's reinforcing the simple thought that's been there all along. There is one man, one woman, they're allowed sexual relations in their marriage and only within their marriage. There's nothing else allowed in that. And God has just spelled it out so that men could not fight against it. Now, in terms of it, think about what we see in our nation, and you think back, it's not new. These were practices that were happening in the lands round about Israel and in the land of Canaan, where Israel's going to go to take up residence. God is saying, just because everyone else does it, does not mean you can do it. Unfortunately, we have a lot of people today that go back to that same thing we've talked about. The my choice, my body, it's my life, I can do what I want. It's my decision. Well, you're absolutely right. But what are the consequences of your decision? What does it mean when that happens? God's trying to take care of the long-term consequences by reminding them of these things here and of his will. We pick up at verse 22, heading through the end of the chapter, we see some prohibitions and holiness, the idea of what man ought not to do and ought to do. Picking up at verse 22, going through verse 27. Ye shall therefore keep all my statutes and all my judgments and do them, that the land, whither I bring you to dwell therein, spew you not out. And ye shall not walk in the manners of the nation which I cast out before you, for they committed all these things, and therefore I abhorred them. But I have said unto you, ye shall inherit their land, and I will give it unto you to possess it, a land that floweth with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God, and have separated you from other people. Ye shall therefore put difference between clean beast and unclean, between unclean fowls and clean, and ye shall not make your souls abominable by beast, or by fowl, or by any manner of living thing that creepeth on the ground, which I have separated from you as unclean. And ye shall be holy unto me, for I, the Lord, am holy, and have severed you from other people, that ye should be mine. A man also, or a woman that hath a familiar spirit, or that is a wizard, shall surely be put to death. They shall stone them with stones, their blood shall be upon them. We step back and we think about what is being said here. Verse 22 and 23, we get this three distinct parts that are in here. The first is a reminder to reject the customs and practices of the nations and walk in the Lord's instructions. If the church, unfortunately, there are many denominations in this world that have gone this route. If the church is just like the world, it's not the church. It's that simple. If we want to dress like everyone else, if we want to eat like everyone else, if we look at it in Old Testament terms here for a moment, if we want to dress like everyone else, eat like everyone else, practice the customs just like everyone else, do the things that everyone else does, then can I be what God wants? That's the picture God's putting forth. So 22 and 23, look how God said that, in fact. In 22, he says, ye shall therefore keep all my statutes and all my judgments and do them. Well, otherwise, the land's going to spew you out. God's going to remove you from the land. Now, think about Israel. Israel has been in captivity in Egypt. They've been freed from that captivity. They're at the foot of Mount Sinai right now. They're going to wander for 40 years because of their untrusting nature of God, their disbelief of him. But then they're going to go in and be able to conquer a land and make it their home. But then what's going to happen after a few centuries? They're going to get removed. Why? Because they failed in this very statement here. They didn't follow the statutes of God. You think about a football team many times, or any other things that we can apply this to at times. When there is a specific way prescribed to do something, when the coach says you run this play, you do it this way. It may not seem to work to you every time, but overall it is going to work. It's the way to do it. But when men begin to think, oh, I'll just do it the way I want to do it, what happens? And that's God saying the same thing here with our activities in the world. Look at verse 23. You're told to walk in God's statutes in 22. In 23, you shall not walk in the manners of the nation, which I cast out before you. Why? They committed all these things, and therefore I abhorred them. If we go do that which God abhors, what can we expect God to feel towards us? That sounds overly simplistic. It is that simple. If we do what God abhors, what do we expect God to feel like towards us? And so it will be the same as those nations. Verses 24 through 26, the second portion here, a reminder of the blessings of God for his people, those that have been separated, set apart in this case by their dietary nature. You think about that. God says, I've separated you from other people. In verse 25, he tells them, put a difference between clean beast and unclean. Now, you think about Israel. Did Israel have an effect on those round about her when they followed what God said? In the cases of, say, swine, they absolutely did. They influenced all those round about them that even to this day, even though they were never under that law, how many nations in the Middle East refuse to eat swine? And they say it's because of their religion. Well, their religion took it over from who? The Israelites who were in their midst. Oh, well, maybe we need to be like them in this case. Unfortunately, they don't do it with everything, but they did it with that. The fowls and everything else the same way. You see God saying, you are different. Think about the Israelite. If an Israelite were to do everything that everyone in Canaan did round about them, what would that Israelite be called by God? He would be a Canaanite. Why? He's doing exactly what the Canaanites did. You want to be God's people, you have to do what God says to do. Verses 26 and 27 definitely bring that round about. When 26, he says, ye shall be holy unto me. You're going to be set apart to me, God says, for I, the Lord, am holy, and have severed you from other people, that you should be mine. And so we see that same picture continuing on. If we are the same as everyone round about us in the world today, if we wear the same styles of clothing, If we act the same way, if we do the same things, what's the difference between us and the world? Are we severed? Are we set apart? And in verse 27, God brings it back again to about a man or a woman that has that familiar spirit or that wizard. You think you can do something on your own? They were to be put to death under that old law. And I think really one of the most telling statements is what the chapter closes with. It's been in a lot of the statements. Men want to say, oh, God made these arbitrary laws. Well, you're correct. For those today that believe abortion is legal and able to be done, and that there's nothing wrong with it under the laws of God, notice how God's going to answer that. Their blood shall be upon them. It's the choice they made. It goes right back to what we said about some of that. My body, my choice. You're right. It is your body. It is your choice. Think closely about your choices and where it's going to lead. That's where we'll quit for this morning. We'll pick up at chapter 21 on Wednesday night.